Welcome to this week's episode of Talks on Walks. Today we have got Mark Freer, who is the founder of Heads Up and Freer, and formerly the Global Head of Marketing at Telefonica.
Brilliant. Hi, George. Lovely to be here and talking with you. Well, let's start with the family. I mean, I'm married and have two children, a 9-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. I've recently, earlier this year, set up my own business, Heads Up and Freer, doing performance, leadership and communication consulting, which is really close to my heart, and I'm passionate about working with people, understanding what makes them tick, helping them with their performance, and then more generally sort of stepping into things like leadership and high performance teams. I've spent 30 odd years before that in industry within communications and technology, which during that time's gone through massive transformation, and I've done some brilliant roles, different leadership roles across actually lots of different countries. I've sort of in the last 10 or 15 years done a lot of international roles. They've related to commercial stuff, marketing stuff, partnerships, working with different companies to collaborate and create success going forward. Done a lot of work with sales teams as well, leading and running those teams across those different areas. I'm passionate about sport, so I've played sport from a very young age and have always been involved in team sport. So I love the team ethos, and really love seeing it when teams connect and really kind of step up and overachieve. And I'm a coach as well. I do a lot of coaching voluntarily with sports teams locally, and I do mentoring as well with different, particularly within the Chartered Institute of Marketing. I mentor there with people there, and I mentor students from several universities or schools.
Saw you sort of mentioned there, you mentioned teams and stuff, and I think a lot of at the moment with the insurance industry, people are struggling maybe, and that could be to do with their sort of culture and their values. I think that'd probably be a big challenge for them.
Mm-hmm.
I would sort of want to ask you, what would you say is a great way to combat this, and what sort of benefits will companies who take on this challenge see? So if they, really combat that culture issue.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've interestingly, culture sort of figured in a lot of the work I've done, not just in the UK but with international teams, and how you develop teams and the role culture plays in that is really important. And interestingly, I was just looking at some of the challenges before we spoke around, particularly in the insurance industry, and actually there were 3 people related ones that came up. One was trust, which I guess is customers trusting the insurance companies or brokers that are out there, which I guess is crucial. Poor management came up, interestingly. So I guess if you've got poor management in an organization, that's going to influence not only how the team internally perform, but how they engage with customers. And there was something there about skills, and I know we come on to talent in a bit, but either having not enough of the right skills or the wrong skills in those places. So I mean, there were some other tech issues which I'm sure linked to supportory irrelevance, cyber risks, and the complexity of insurance technology. But coming back to culture, I mean, I think the culture of your business is very much sort of defines how you do things around the organization and what you believe in. So some of those aspects around culture in terms of your values, what you really believe in within the organization, whether that's trust, empowerment, integrity, professionalism, resilience, and then not only just those being spoken words, but demonstrated across everything the organization does. And often it's the leaders that have to set the example and walk the talk, which is crucial. I mean, I've been involved in quite a few cultural transformation programs, and you get a lot of energy at the start, you get input from the teams, but keeping that momentum and sustaining it and everyone being involved and demonstrating and living those values
Yeah.
is actually quite tricky. And you obviously get changes in organisation and management and leaders. So how do you keep developing that culture?
Yeah.
And and it's really important because you create a trusted environment. Um, that flows through in terms of how the teams engage and probably how the management behave and perform. And you get into things like you'll see people developing their skills and pushing themselves,
Yeah.
and you probably retain the people in the organization and also attract people because
Yeah.
it's seen as a positive place to work.
Yeah, so like almost a real butterfly effect there. You know, you've started off with something really quite crucial to the organization in itself, when it comes to that talent side, but then in future, by the upkeep and really just driving that and focusing on that, that, like you say, develops people's skills.
Mm,
People can grow with the company more. You're more likely to retain those people because there's more
yeah,
to them than just that financial aspect. Um,
absolutely.
and I think with that, then, yeah, like you say, there is a challenge there, and people really do need to work on that. And I think, especially with the culture side, communication comes into it quite a lot.
Absolutely.
It's how do these companies improve their internal communication, and like, what's the end result if they do it correctly?
Well, I always found internal communication was very close, needed to be very closely aligned with the culture of the organization. The two go hand in hand because how you communicate with your people across the organization um, is crucial to developing a culture and sustaining it. And there are obviously many other benefits of communicating effectively, particularly for leaders. I mean, the more effective the leaders are with their communication, generally, the better performance of an organization, not surprisingly. And there are stats around that. I think you've only got to look at the problems that arise when you don't have decent communication happening.
Yeah.
If people don't know what's going on, they become anxious and concerned. And in fact, I was reading a little note or something the other day which just said even the way you communicate on things like putting a quick catch up in the diary with people in your team,
Yeah.
which might sound completely innocent, but if you as a leader haven't thought about what your team members thinking about, they might suddenly start catastrophizing and think, oh my gosh, George wants to
Yeah.
speak to me because I've performed badly. Or
Yeah.
so even little things like that can have a massive impact on how you're communicating across the business. I think there's some principles for communicating internally that people should think about. I think you need to be open and honest. As leaders in an organization, you can't tell everyone everything, but you do need to be open and sometimes vulnerable. And if you've got problems within the organization, share them, because quite often people have solutions. And I think that second point about having a two-way communication is really important. You can't just send out messages from the top down. You've got to
Yeah.
find a way where you're listening to the grassroots of the organization, which could be people out in the field. It could be your insurance agents or brokers that are out dispersed that you don't see much. And how do you get information to them that's relevant, insightful, open, honest, maybe
Sure.
fun, maybe
Yeah.
inspiring as well? And how do you give them a channel to communicate back to you as well? Because the most successful organizations harness the power of their people, and the power of their people includes their opinions, thoughts, ideas, and that's often where the gems are in terms of building success for your organization going forward and transforming. And of course, when you do that, and you can't, when you listen as well to the opinions, you have to then take action as well. So you have to say, it's fantastic, we got all these views in from you. um,
Yeah.
this is what we're doing. Okay. And it might not always take on board their views. Quite often it won't.
Yeah.
But if you're open and honest and authentic about that, I think that works. And finally, George, I was going to say that there are some really powerful tools that people can use to help themselves with their communications internally. Depends on the size of the organization.
Yeah.
I've found with larger organizations, there's tools like Workplace, which is a a business tool from Facebook, which is really powerful. I know I've used that a lot, and it's
Yeah.
brilliant for engaging large global teams. It's great for creating different communities that can share content.
Yeah.
It is, as I said, sort of like business social media, and it's really
Yeah.
powerful. There's some like Office Vibe that's an interesting tool for smaller organizations trying to gauge the level of engagement in the organization with their people. And
Yeah.
you can communicate through the platform as well in terms of capturing ideas or polling the team, that kind of stuff. And then you just got some more simple, there's lots of more fun engagement tools,
Yeah.
for different quizzes and whatnot, or tools like, I don't know, even things like Slido, where you can do quick polls, interactives, polling of views
Yeah.
and opinions, when you're, however you're communicating internally, because there's again a plethora of things: newsletters,
Yeah.
town halls with the whole organization, weekly calls, monthly calls,
Yeah.
annual year end
Yeah.
performance reviews, kickoff for the new year, new targets, celebrating successes, celebrating what people have done and where people have struggled is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Recognition, patting people on the back, that there's so much you can do, and it does take a bit of effort, but it's really worth doing, and it makes a huge impact on the way your team think and perform.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned there, that there are plenty of tools that are readily available, for insurers to really take a hold of it and really use. I mean, from my own experience, we utilize Teams, and for a lot of
Yeah.
insurers, they don't realize that that's already included, in their package. They've already got these communication tools that they're paying for. They're just not finding and using. So,
Yeah.
and like say Office Vibe, we use that ourselves a lot, for reviewing stuff. It's great though that
Yeah.
there's that channel there that can really help out. And we talk about communication, and we have to talk, a lot about talent in that. We've
Hmm.
got our culture, we've got our
Yeah.
communication, but really talent, in that is quite a big factor. Companies can struggle, and it can be down to simple, like we talked about earlier, that culture being off, or something being off.
Hmm.
But the problem is you've got that internally happening, but then you look at trying to bring in someone new. You're looking to try and bring in someone with that right skill set. How are they going to attract that A player? What do they need to do? Um, you know, with that talent issue of we've maybe sorted out the internal. How are we bringing in that new talent?
Yeah, well, I think these all link together. If you've got a strong culture, um, you're underpinning that with really strong communication across the organization. You you kind of create this driving force of empowered people. I mean, if you do that well, you can obviously create this noise in the marketplace about being a good employer, and that's obviously the perfect position to be, where people are coming to you because you are. I heard one of my recruitment friends who runs his recruitment business. He talked about being the right employer, and being the right employer is, again, a lot about how that company behaves, its culture, how it's seen in the marketplace. So if you get to that point, you've got people knocking on your door that want to come and work for you. Of course, at the moment, there's a kind of a skill shortages in many areas. I mean, in the tech space, it's
Yeah,
cybersecurity, cloud accredited specialists, artificial intelligence, big data. Those are areas where resource is limited, and constrained, and therefore the employees or potential employees can, they'll go around and look for the best employer with the
yeah,
best package. So I think if you're you've got to think about how your company operates, the cultures, the values, the leadership, being authentic. I think you've got to think about, particularly with a lot of the Generation Z coming through, what is your company trying to achieve in the wider context of society and the environment, because those are important issues to the younger generation these days. So you need to not only stand for something, you need to take action and that needs to be seen. So I think there are some things you can do within the communities you work with, or society at large, or to do with your, carbon footprint emission,
Yeah.
beyond just being greenwashing where people say they're doing it,
Yeah.
actually doing something. And then I think things like your policies around hybrid working and flexible working is crucial at the moment, because we've been through COVID. That's changed the way people think about working,
Yeah.
and companies need to think about how that, what is their ongoing policy there. Is flexibility is absolutely fine. We trust our people. We know they're going to do what they need to do. Or are we wanting to bring them back into the office, telling them they need to come back,
Yeah.
even thinking about tracking? I've heard of people putting technology in to track what people are doing at home, which, my view on that is that that's a road to, that's not the right thing to do, because
Yeah.
you're already not creating an environment of trust. So there's some positions a company can take. I think also in terms of developing talent, you can get involved in being on that, being involved with developing talent in the market. And I mean things
Sure.
like apprenticeships, internships, scholarships, accepting that actually sometimes not recruiting someone that doesn't have all the skills yet,
Yeah.
but has the right attitude and you can develop them, is really important to think about. And which is obviously internships, working with academic,
Yeah.
higher education, where there's that flow through, where people want job roles to learn. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been involved with a few conversations around that recently. And then, at the other end, there's things like scholarships, that where there are grants that exist for placements for people that aren't necessarily represented, fairly in society, and it's tougher for them to come to the top to get some
Sure.
of those roles. So I think there's a number of things there, George, around talent, understanding the talent you want and how your organization is operating, and whether that's going to attract or
Yeah.
detract people coming to you, and then getting involved with how you can develop the talent.
I suppose this really links into business outcomes here. We've got three big challenges that
Mm-hmm.
really, as a company, they're really going to want to get hold of and really start using that to advantage, affecting productivity, which in turn affects growth.
Mm-hmm.
We've developed a business guide ourselves for the industry to help with various outcomes. But what would you sort of say they could do to make positive changes and ultimately transform the business into an industry leader?
Well, I think when it comes to outcomes, achieving outcomes and getting your teams to really overperform and kind of step up to the unexpected, that there's some quite simple principles to follow there, which can have a massive impact. And certainly there are thoughts around leadership, and I use this phrase, intent-based leadership, which is where you give the control and the power to your teams,
Yeah.
right? Which is really hard for a lot of leaders to do, because they feel that need to command and control.
Yeah.
And there are several different schools of leadership and thought on this. But when you dig into that, of course, if you have a command and control mentality,
Yeah.
your teams always expect to be told what to do, in simple terms. Okay.
Yeah.
So you might have an organization of 300 people in your insurance company, and if you're at the top cascading down what you want to do, you don't, how do you expect the people underneath to make decisions and feel empowered and trusted? Versus, do you try and move to a model where you're expressing an intent, we need to get from here to here, or
Yeah.
this is where I'd like us to be going to. Off you go. You decide how we're going to get there, teams. You are empowered
Yeah.
within your teams to make decisions. And that could be, you're an insurance broker, and actually when I'm making those sales, do I always have to go back to my manager or my team leader to get it
Sure.
signed off as a proposal? Or actually, am I empowered to make
Yeah.
a decision on that? Or if I'm in customer service dealing with an issue, can I make the decision based on the information I have? Because the information is out in the field
Yeah.
quite often in that moment. It's not with the leaders in the organization. So
Yeah.
they've got to create an agile and flexible way of working to make that happen. And of course, you've got lots of volatility in the market, whether that's economic, whether that's to do with interest rates, whether that's to do with supply chain. So you've got to find ways to be agile to allow your business to react in those right moments. So I think that intent-based marketing is really important. And of course, behind all that, if you've got a clear vision, purpose, and you're, taking action towards that, I think they're really empowered. So it is, for me, it's all about empowering the people in your teams. You've brought them in,
Sure.
they've got certain skills. Don't constrain them. And I think you'll be surprised at what people in your teams can do. If you give them that freedom, you inspire them and
Yeah.
motivate them and trust them, it's amazing what they can achieve.
And I suppose from that, you talk about it's maybe a difficult time now more than ever. Then you want to get that customer experience right, which obviously comes from
Yeah,
having that trust and empowering your teams to really take that on and provide the best level that they can, which comes from that
absolutely,
confidence
absolutely.
aspect. Yeah. Would you say there's sort of anything else at all you'd like to sort of cover today? Any?
Well, what have we talked about? We talked about culture, the
Sure.
importance that plays. We've talked about internal communication and the power that plays, in terms of how people engage and the culture that exists within an organization. We've talked about the importance of talent, and how you retain it, develop it, or attract it. For me, that's very much linked to the leadership styles that organizations have, and
Sure.
how do you empower your teams with intent
Yeah.
without telling them what to do.
Yeah.
And so those are all people related things, which I think, again, when I was looking at some of the insurance industry challenges, three of them, three of them were linked to sort of skills, trust, and poor management.
Yeah.
Um,
Perfect. Well, what's really good about today is that we can really announce that Mark and Support Tree are sort of partnering up. We love values, culture, and really pushing that. And I know Mark yourself that is your whole business aspect is really driving that. You've got to build your team up and that leadership
Absolutely.
aspect. And so it's great to really announce that we're teaming up on that front. And hopefully we can share more about our partnership up in the coming weeks and a few more details about that on our website and stuff. So, yeah, great to announce that. I'd like to say thank you, Mark, for coming on Talks on Walks today. Is there anything you'd just like to finally promote out to anyone at all?
Well, just building on what you said there. Delighted to be working with Support Tree, George. My areas of focus are obviously all people related, but
Yeah,
people and technology go hand in hand quite often. And obviously, Support Tree are working with companies within the insurance sector and many others about, putting in the right tech to allow their employees to communicate, putting in
sure.
secure tech to make sure the complexities of technology work properly, and help businesses achieve their performance. The bit I work on, if people are interested, I do very specific coaching, which helps people, again, linked to the point we were talking about, helps people to coach and thrive. And again, if people are wanting to experience that, I'm happy to offer up some individual complementary coaching sessions to leaders that are associated with Heads Up and Freer. And the other areas, I run leadership programs. So again, if some of the organizations that work with Support Tree are not just struggling with or looking for solutions around changing their tech or enhancing it, but they're also looking for people solutions to help motivate their team, build high performance teams, build a culture,
Sure.
manage internal comms. Again, I'd be happy to talk about potential solutions, or I tend to work on a basis where it's sort of over a period of time, like,
Yeah.
6 months. You need some time to make these things work. But again, if people quote heads up and free, I can negotiate on the terms of the deal and the pricing.
Perfect. Perfect. And we will include all links to everything in our descriptions or comments or any of our posts. So make sure to check them out and give Mark a message as well. Thank you for coming on the podcast today, Mark. It's been great to have you and discuss so many really impactful topics that the insurance industry can hopefully use. But yeah, it was really great to have you, and thank you for giving us the time today.
You're very welcome, George. Thanks for having me.